All right, Martin, count us down. 3, 2, 1, and welcome everybody to episode 4 of the Frida Cinema's new series, WTF Wednesday, where I, Trevor Dillon, the host and the programmer at the Frida Cinema, picks a weird, wild, or wacky film from our ever-expanding programming library over at thefridacinema.org and discusses it with a guest. The film that we are going to be discussing this week is called The Climate of the Hunter, and joining me is one of the great writers that we have on our blog team here at the Frida Cinema. Please welcome Anthony McKelroy. Hello, Anthony. How are you doing?
Hi, Trevor. I'm great. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
And I think I misspoke in the intro. I meant to say streaming library. I don't know what kind of library I attribute it to, but we have about 1 million movies streaming over at the Frida Cinema at all times. How you doing tonight? We don't usually get into too many pleasantries with our guests, but I don't get to see you all that often.
No, that's true. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. Just got off work, so settling into the homestead. I was thinking a lot about this movie today at work. It's really hard. No matter what your feelings on it, kind of stays with you. So yeah, I was thinking about this movie a lot, I'll say.
I had a very similar experience. We like to start on Letterboxd, see what the people are saying, some popular reviews for Climate of the Hunter, which I call The Climate of the Hunter. It's called Climate of the Hunter. It was made in 2019, distributed in 2020, directed by Mickey Reece, who is like the head of the genre film community in Oklahoma City. I did a little bit of research on him, listened to a podcast with him in it. We'll talk about that later. But the plot is two beautiful sisters vie for the affections of a man who may or may not be a vampire. It is rated 3.2 on Letterboxd, which is pretty high for like,
out of 5.
Yeah. I always say anything from 3 to 4 is pretty good. Anything above 3.5 is really good. Anything above 4 is like extremely good. So.
Yeah. I'd say that's been my scale. Not every movie gets a 5.
No. Okay, so I'm going to go through and I will read some reviews real quick. So this is a popular review from Matt Lynch. He gave it 3.5 stars. He called it Ingmar Bergman's Persona with cocktail weenies.
Interesting name drop there.
yes, very much so. I thought that was, I was like Persona. Oh man, I did not see that as a reference at all. We have a review here from Evan, gave it 4 out of 5, said, look, I'm a sucker for anything that features prominent use of star filters and Jell-O salad.
Oh my gosh, people are eating up the food in this film. No pun intended.
Yes. And then I'll read a couple more. Eat, Drink, Death. I like to read positive and negative reviews. Eat, Drink, Death says, delightfully peculiar and unexpectedly mesmerizing. Vibe reminded me of a great deal of Cemetery Man. I feel like you should watch this with as little preamble as I did. But Eat, Drink, Death gave it 2 out of 5.
At least there's a good, they preface it properly, you know?
Yeah. And here's a cheap plug, but recent reviews for this movie I come up on here. Review by Trevor says, if the rest of Mickey Reese's other 400 feature films are even half this interesting, I owe some of them a watch. A genuinely weird mix of mumblecore and I just put spoilers. Okay, Anthony, let's get into it. What did you think of Climate of the Hunter?
I wished I could say that I like this movie. I don't want to use the H word. I don't want to say that I hate it, but I was actively uninterested in it for most of the time. And you know what? Hey, that's a big, bold statement coming right out of the gate.
Right.
But hey, watch it. Honestly, like what some of the reviews are saying, give it a watch. Make sure you're in the right state of mind to take something in that's not conventional, that's not trying to be a big tentpole movie. It's not trying to be what's popular now. It's trying to be what's popular 50 years ago, which is a different vibe altogether. I didn't care for it. I'm sure other people, and I kind of knew watching it. I'm like, oh, I hate this movie, but everyone else is gonna love it because it has a certain quality that's attractive to a certain portion of like movie-going audiences, which it's got this visual flair, this visual dimension that is technically executed like fine, but I don't feel like there's anything that it's adding to the scene when it's used. What did you think?
No notes, perfect movie. No,
Wouldn't change a frame.
I texted you about 20 minutes into it and was like, sorry, dude, you got stuck with a boring one. I feel really bad because, like, it really was just kind of mumblecore. The 1:3:3 aspect ratio was sort of interesting all the time. I thought it looked really good because I know that Mickey Reece works on an extremely low budget. It had a really interesting, almost like Mike Flanagan soft palette to it, which I liked. I don't know what they shot it on, but I could look that up, I suppose. It really reminded me, again, this is really weird because I haven't seen this in any of the reviews, but it reminded me like a Wes Anderson movie at first. It had like very short dialogue snippets, a very cold father-son relationship. Anytime it showed the food and had the voiceover, it felt cutesy, like a Wes Anderson movie in that way. I couldn't pin it down, which is a compliment to any movie, really. But after that 20 minutes where I was like, oops, sorry, man, you got stuck with a really boring one, it did become something that I truly can't really compare to anything. Like when I saw the Persona thing, I was like, oh, Persona, interesting. I would have never drawn that one-to-one. But yeah, like I said in my Leber Talks, I call it Leber Talks until they pay me to say Letterboxd review. Mickey Reece has made a ton of movies, and he caught up some steam for a movie called T-Rex a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now. And I think I might check that out because I like you said, Climber to the Hunter was not my tempo in any way. I know it got into Fantastic Fest, which is a big deal. Fantastic Fest is like a top 2 genre festival in the country. So yeah, it's like mumblecore meets vampire. I thought it looked good. I couldn't quite fit it into, I love genre blending, which is exactly what this is. So yeah, I think once that flip switched and like basically the scene, and we can go into spoilers right now if you want, but the scene where she opens the door and she sees the devils playing poker, and the devil's like,
that was a
shut the
great
door.
scene.
Yeah, it was like, oh, okay, so that like there's something really weird going on here. And then when the son poisoned him with the garlic, I thought that was cool.
Right, except that the son disappears for the remainder of the film.
Yeah.
And there was like failings like that in the script where you have to wonder, okay, in a script you could have something like that when you know that the visuals are going to take over after a certain degree and to become something else. But for this film, the son character was too conspicuous to not like connect at the end. And most things did not connect at the end because she imagined it. Did you have that? Was that your interpretation of the ending? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it starts with her imagining the stuff when she opens the door and seeing the they're not called Draculas, they're called vampires. When she sees the vampire, so that's where it starts. So that was my reading as the end as well, is that she kind of imagined it. Yeah, that kind of that Dr. Caligari ending of being like it was all made up is like kind of always like a kind of ending for me personally.
It was a trope at the time. Yeah, it was a trope at the time when they were big in the 60s and 70s, which is what this film owes its debt to.
Right.
And so yeah, I'm just curious, just sort of in a general sense, what was the intent behind doing something that was such a cliche and executing it in a way where it's still a cliche. It doesn't elevate it or subvert that formula at all. And I don't think it really even examines the fact that it is a cliche. It kind of just is one made today, made to look like a film from 50 years ago. And you know what? Most of the time, I wouldn't bat an eye on that, and I'm not holding it against the director. But gosh, people are calling this Persona, and is it just because there's 2 women? Do you think is that what people see?
Yeah,
like
probably.
it stars 2 women, and it's a little weird. Definitely Bergman. I don't know. I just think that's a lazy comparison. But yeah, I was similarly totally hooked for like the first 10 or 20 minutes. I was waiting for some other dimension of the film to reveal itself. Instead, none of the characters got more interesting, and it concluded the exact way you would expect a film about a schizophrenic to conclude. Like they tell you in the beginning that they're prone to delusions, and then the whole plot is whether or not someone is who they say they are. Right. Like, come on. I don't know.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of a movie that I really liked, The Love Witch, which came out in 2016, I believe. Yes.
I've not seen it.
The Love Witch is very indebted to the types of film it's paying full homage to. which this is as well, like you mentioned, but that one is very long. That film was like 2 hours long. So I'll give Climate of the Hunter the edge in the fact that it's 82 minutes. Whether the mileage it got out of that 82
it was
minutes.
long enough.
Yes, exactly. It got whatever mileage it could out of those 82 minutes. Mickey Reece seems to be a very efficient filmmaker. I will say, when you're making a movie on such a small budget, the time is such a big factor. And I can't say this any other way without sounding extremely mean, but it did seem like the movie was put together very quickly. You know what I mean? And that's just how he works.
And I'd be curious to know what that time period is, because that does speak multitudes of what could have gone wrong, right? But you do hear about those films that have 29-day shoots, 19-day shoots, and they fucking kill it. So I'd say there were other problems at play here. Maybe even not problems. To me, it speaks of, because he's so prolific, it speaks to him intentionally doing something that maybe we're not ready for as an audience, or maybe that is, I don't know, if we want to be harsher, it's more vanity on his part and like self-indulgence, which is fine. There's room enough for that. But I don't think we have to kid ourselves that like what ended up on the screen was profound in the same ways that Persona is, or I don't know, what's another film with two women?
Recently Black Bear, which I absolutely love, which had a weird stylistic vibe just like this. It kind of reminded me of Black Bear a little bit, but Black Bear finished very, very strongly. It's my favorite movie of the year, Black Bear, and the fact that I'm mentioning it with Climate of the Hunter means I didn't dislike this film. I found it extremely interesting. I will say it was like watching a Clint Eastwood movie where I know there's like everyone's doing this on like 1 or 2 takes, and if you can get a good performance scene to scene out of any actor, I think this is extremely impressive. And I'll say the guy who played Ben Hall, the main actor,
and wonderful.
Yeah.
Couldn't speak better about the actors. Absolutely.
These actors,
they did wonderful with that material.
These actors had to tackle a lot of dialogue, and what I'm thinking, it was not a lot of time to rehearse this stuff. And any scene that you think that someone gave a good performance out of, you can like multiply that. You know what I mean? Like that's got to be multiplied because of the low budget and stuff like that. And I'm seeing Ben Hall on Letterboxd is in Minari, which is out now. So like,
oh, interesting.
There's a world where the filmmaker behind Minari sees Climate of the Hunter when it came out in 2019, maybe nabs up Ben Hall and is like, this dude's a great actor. I mean, so I thought he was fantastic. The son was like a stereotype of that kind of shitty son character. And of course, I don't mean he's shitty because the dad is the shitty one, right? But
he's a vampire, Trevor. Do you agree with vampirism?
Yeah, so I don't know. This movie is a conundrum. It's kind of the perfect type of movie to really, so someone like you who I know watches a lot of movie and can find the good in a film. Like we could just sit here and be like, this movie sucked. We had nothing for us, but I'm glad that you're the guest on this particular episode we can at least find the stuff we liked in this movie and give it credit where it. Although I don't think we really need to give it too much credit if it has 3.2 on Letterboxd.
No. It's a film that's like obviously brimming with talent from the actors, from the above line to the behind the camera people. There's talent across the board in this film. You can see interesting directing choices. You can see interesting lighting cues. You can see actors, really wearing their character's skin. What you don't see, unfortunately, is an engaging story. You don't see a reflection of these characters' interior lives. I got the feeling that there was just a lot of irony in the film, and I couldn't tell what was the genuine moment that I'm supposed to latch onto. Is it tacky because it's interesting? Is it tacky because it's period appropriate? It was really hard to parse out with this film. And you know what? I'm not surprised, considering the interviews I have seen with Mickey Reece. He is similarly sort of like admitted, or transparent, I should say, about his, we'll say, a method, which is just sort of writing the scenes without any structure or arcs in mind, which is fine. Sometimes that works and we get great works of art. sometimes we don't, and we need to admit it when we don't. And this is one of those examples where, hey, you can write a vomit rough draft where everything's on the page and you shoot everything's on the page and you edit it exactly the way it's on the page, and you still have a bad movie. And we just have to move on and make the next one. And that clearly doesn't bother Mickey Reece, considering this is his 30 fucking whatever movie. Can I swear on here?
Yeah. It's okay. It's WTF Wednesday. Right?
Well, WTF, Mickey Reece. What happened with this one? He's not worried about it, I'm sure.
No. Mickey Reece. I will say his top-rated film on Letterboxd is T-Rex from T-Rex from 2014, which I did hear about when it came out. So I'm actually going to probably have to give that a go. It is black and white, and it features catch this, eccentric characters. I saw an interview with him, or I heard one on the Nightmare on Film Street podcast. Those guys are awesome. Those folks are awesome, I should say. And Mickey Reece, like I said, basically the head honcho in genre filmmaking in the industry of Oklahoma filmmaking. It's really interesting when I have made a couple short films that have gone to festivals around the country, and I've gone to some of them, and I always forget when you go into different cities like Boise or Oklahoma City, like those cities have their own film like industry that's small.
Oh, yeah.
Not LA, but it's just interesting. Or like even like the West Texas, in Dallas, where like someone like a David Lowery comes from or something. Like these smaller industries exist out in this country, and he's making a ton of movies out of this industry. So check out T-Rex if you watched this and you liked it, or even if you didn't like it, like Anthony and I weren't huge fans of it. Maybe I'll check that out, and maybe it'll be like, okay, this is what this dude can do. But just in terms of sheer output, shout out to Mickey Reece. Seems like a pretty cool dude.
It's undeniable, and it's clear that when a film doesn't connect with his audience, it's not going to necessarily impede his strategy for the next film. And that's the thing. From what I understand of Mickey Reece in the interviews I've seen, his strategy is just making the film. So once it's done, he's on to the next one. I'm sure he's not thinking about whether or not we got it. That's never the goal for any good artist. The goal for the artist is to express themselves. And if this film is at all supposed to be a product of Mickey Reece, then I'd say it also expresses and lets us know who he is. So these are the things that he's interested in. And so by watching it, I feel like I know him a bit more.
Right.
And I'm curious to see what he does next, more than anything. He's clearly talented, otherwise they wouldn't have let him make this many films. So I'll be there at the next one.
Yeah, and Mickey Reece, I don't know. I heard him talking. He seems very, very cool. It's hard to not want to support someone who is basically like out there doing it. You know what I mean? And like, I'm just like you. I'm gonna check out the next one. I'm gonna check out T-Rex. I'm going to introduce a new segment to this show. This is, of course, WTF Wednesday. A lot of people think they know what WTF stands for, but it actually stands for...
What does it stand for, Trevor?
It stands for What the Factor. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be saying 1 to 10, what would you give the film Climate of the Hunter on a What the Factor?
Let's see. What the factor? I would say, in terms of surprise and shock, I will say I'm gonna assign it to one part of the film that gets this, and then the rest of the film will give a rating.
Sure.
So the title credits, I'd say, get a 10 for me in terms of a what the fact. The title credits of this film, do you remember? They happen so quick, and it's all on one screen in one shot, and they all sort of like ripple like a wave across the frame. It's really interesting. And so that really caught my attention and kind of pulled me in and made me, want to like the film. But unfortunately, it didn't sustain. So the rest of the film, in terms of a what the, I'll give it a 3, because it makes me say what the, but I don't care to hear the answer.
Oh, well, that's a great review. I'm gonna go just right up top. I'll say my number and I'll justify it. I'm gonna give it a 6. I'm gonna give it a 6 on the what the factor, because I could not make heads or tails of it. And I will say this, Mumblecore, and I heard that them say this on the Nightmare on Film Street podcast, and the interviewer was a little embarrassed when he asked this, but he was genuinely kind of just asking a very straightforward question of, Mickey, how do you come up with the conversations your characters are having? And Mickey was like, what do you mean? And he's like, because I watched this movie and the conversations were so wide ranging and odd that I have never thought this about a filmmaker, but I thought, how did you just think of those conversations? And I went, oh yeah. Once I watched the movie, I went, yeah, that is kind of impressive about Mumblecore, how they can just kind of talk, you know what I mean? And it's like kind of, whether it adds up to anything or not, I thought that was just like, oh yeah, that's fascinating. Like, because when I write a script, it's something I've literally written 5 feature scripts this year. Will any of them ever get made? I don't know, but they're about stuff I know about. So when I see a movie that might be about something that someone doesn't like, let's take, for example, Phantom Thread. I know Paul Thomas Anderson probably studied that stuff very, very much, but that movie has that movie has an English sensibility to it. He's not an English man. It has, of course, he can take as many notes from all of his help, that's around him as he needs. But I just am always fascinated when a filmmaker makes a movie about something that they actually started out having no idea about. So when I see these characters having these eccentric, weird conversations, I actually was like drawn in by like, why is he talking? Like, remember the scene where he was at the table and he had like the pretty good special effects, by the way, of like the infinite galaxies. He was talking about the infinite galaxies.
Yes.
And it's just sort of just like, did he just hear this? Did he just hear this bit of information and was like, I'm going to have a character talk about this in a movie? And the answer is probably, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a nice exercise because it's like there's a lot of weird jokes that he sets up in that film with these long conversations that essentially amount to like a weird non sequitur punchline, and then it moves on.
Right.
So on that level, it works. It's like a load bearing bit of dialogue.
Right.
But most of the other time, it's like kind of just impressive to see that someone. I think he actually had another writer on this, but that it could just use one writer could just output these phrases, even if they hear them from somewhere else, that they could remember them for that, summon them in that moment. Hey, I like the dialogue and the spoken word as much as the next guy, but let's be honest, there was a lot in that movie that they could have just cut or rephrased. I don't know. And you know what? Hey, I didn't think of Mumblecore when I watched this. I wouldn't say I'm too familiar with the tenets of a Mumblecore film, but it's very talky. And I love talky films. Don't get me wrong. Totally. I love it as much as the next guy, but you keep that for the theater. Cinema is images. And I feel like this was attempting something else, which is fine. I'm not begrudging it for it. It just didn't work in the way that I think people are thinking it works. But that's just me.
Cool. So I gave it a 6. You gave it a 3. That's a total out of 9.
A 3, and then a 10 for the titles.
Those were fascinating, and there was a couple of things that I really liked. Yeah. Anthony, I think we've covered Climate of the Hunter. As this, if this episode is 20 minutes, that's a fourth of the way to the length of the entire film.
Oh wow! I feel like if we went the full 9 yards, we would make a better film just in this conversation alone.
Just a full-length podcast, basically, of us just talking about infinite galaxies.
It should be paired with the film for context. You should have to listen to this conversation at the end.
Right.
No, wow, that was quick though. It did not feel like 20 minutes.
Yeah, we go through these pretty quickly. Anybody who watched The Climate of the Hunter is just coming here to basically hang out with us and hear us talk about it. Do you have anything that you want to plug before you get out of here?
Let's see. I know we got some articles coming up through the Frida. We've got a big piece reviewing the Bruce Lee film double features that we're doing at the end of the month, Way of the Dragon and Fist of Fury. So look out for that. I'm going to be studying just a bit about, I have been a big fan of Bruce Lee my whole life. So this is a great opportunity to write about what his work means and how it connects to his directing style in Way of the Dragon. So hopefully that will be illuminating. Then I think we got, can we talk about the other Frida audio media coming up?
Yeah, sure, of course.
In addition to these WTF Wednesdays, the Frida will also be publishing its first podcast. hopefully very soon here at the end of the month, we're going to be talking with other Frida volunteers, writers, people like Trevor who work behind the scenes, and just sort of talking about what's playing at the Frida. You're going to get updates on what's going on our calendar, as well as insights to the film and filmmakers that we are playing for the month. So it's a little bit more free form, but it's going to be a lot longer. So we're going to have more time to really dig in to what these films mean and what it is that why we like them. So if you like my kind of reviews, if you like talking about the why films work as opposed to what films you like, the more in-depth side of cinema, you think you might like this podcast. So look out for that. It's going to be called Scene Selections for your cinema podcast. We'll just pay attention to the blog.
It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited to finally have our very first offshoot, if not just a Frida Cinema podcast. I'm very, very excited about it. You can always follow the Frida at the Frida Cinema on social media. I just confirmed about 90% of our February programming. I'm very, very stoked about it.
Oh, you did? Yes. Great.
Yes. So we're going to get into that on Monday at our meeting, but I'm really, really excited about it all. Hopefully 100% of it will be confirmed by the time I get to Monday. But you can follow me on my personal social medias at Trevor Dills. And then you can go to my letterbox, which I've been plugging a lot throughout this conversation, at Captain Dills. And I have a list there of all the WTF Wednesday movies that we've been covering. Anthony, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I knew you'd be a killer guest.
I appreciate it. Happy to do it again. And thank you at home for listening, or wherever you're at. If you're on the bus, maybe you take the bus.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will catch you next Wednesday over on the Frida Cinema's YouTube page. Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to go wash my hands.
Yeah.